Yeah. All right. So here's the title page. Is a comparative analysis of law and policy for renewable energy in the Russian Federation and Australia. And this is based on our work on renewable energy policy and law in Australia. Okay, so an overview of the presentation. Did that slide transition work okay for you?
Yes, everything's okay.
Yep.
Don't worry.
Okay, good. All right, so look, we're going to look at the common challenges and opportunities for the two countries. And then we will focus on the question of renewable energy auctions in Australia and the Russian Federation. And if we have time, we can look at the future and the possibilities of energy export from both countries. All right, now the current context that we have is in relation to the COP26 conference happening in Glasgow. So clearly there's a push for net zero by 2050 with all of the countries, and both Russia and Australia are under pressure to make a shift towards non-fossil energy, towards renewable electricity. And so that leads us to the reason why we are looking at this topic of renewable electricity law and the question of incentives and government policies for renewables. And so you can see that the IEA in this most recent publication, Net Zero by 2050, have advocated the use of renewable energy targets and auction mechanisms to encourage renewable electricity investment. All right, so this slide is looking at the common challenges and opportunities. You can see some pictures from the recent climate change conference in Glasgow. And in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see an illustration of the prime ministers of both Australia, the third from the left, Mr. Morrison and Mr. Putin. Australia and Russia have both been, focused in this climate negotiation. So the question here is, what are the common challenges for our two countries and the opportunities? So as you already know, that both countries are major exporters of fossil fuels. For Australia, we're exporting coal and natural gas in the form of liquefied natural gas. All right, so the question is, can there be a shift for both countries towards energy export of renewable energy? Now, both countries have a large area of land and abundant resources of renewable potential to make renewable electricity. And also we have common challenges in terms of the risks from climate change. Okay, so moving to the next slide. So just to start to speak about Australia, and Australia is a federation of states that has a national and subnational governments. And so policy measures are implemented both at the national and subnational level. Now, we have a competitive market for electricity. And the point that I want to make from this slide is that you can see the yellow color is the solar energy being produced and sold into the electricity market over the last 7 days. We have a mixture of these sources of generation. Okay, just to make that a little smaller there, I think that's good. Okay, so yeah, the main point that I want to make is that in Australia, there's been significant uptake of solar electricity generation technology. And now there have been points at which we have produced 60% of our electricity from renewable sources. at a particular point in time. You can see obviously the generation from wind and solar fluctuates over time. All right, to the next slide. Now, the paradox in Australia is that there is a boom in renewable energy investment. And you can see from this slide, more than 10 terawatts of capacity is being built at present. And over $18 billion Australian of investment. And this is in response to largely market pressures and the policies of the subnational governments, the regional governments. At the national level, there's not a very strong policy to encourage renewable energy. However, there are still some measures in place. Okay. Now, at the subnational level, we want to talk about the example of Canberra, where the government has set a policy of 100% renewable electricity back in the year 2016 and has now achieved this target already. And this is interesting that we have already met 100% target. Now, given the size of Canberra, that is perhaps the reason why the size of the target is only 860 megawatts. However, it's still an interesting case study. Now, in common with the Russian Federation, we have used reverse auctions to encourage the investment in renewable electricity. And the reverse auction works where the lowest bid into the auction will win, provided that other conditions are met. And in addition to that, the winner of the auction becomes entitled to receive a fixed price from the electricity distribution company. So it's an entitlement to a feed-in tariff for a fixed term of 15 or 20 years. To move along, and the slight detail is though that we've adapted the feed-in tariff mechanism to incorporate the notion or the idea of a contract for difference. And this is necessary because we have a competitive wholesale market in electricity in Australia. And under the CFD mechanism, there is a guaranteed price that is paid to the generator. I just want to check, is everything going okay so far with hearing and seeing the slides?
All good.
Are you guys with me? All good? Okay, thank you. Spasibo. Just to move quickly now to the Russian Federation and looking at the case study of the solar PV electricity, which is starting to grow in Russia. Now, my skills to explain this electricity mix in Russia are not so good. But again, our main point is that of comparison, the extent of renewable electricity that is not large-scale hydroelectricity is still quite small in Russia, but it is beginning to grow in response to the auction mechanism. So here's a slide more clearly on the terawatt hours produced in the year 2020. This data comes from the International Energy Agency. But if we were to look at this slide in the small corner here, if I was to make this larger, you would see a tiny slice of electricity coming from the renewable sources. So you can see there that the contribution of renewables still at this point is quite small in the Russian Federation. All right, now, for example, to only reach less than 1% of total electricity consumption. Okay, now moving to the question of auctions, this body, ATS, is administering the auction mechanism in the Russian Federation, and there have been 8 auctions to procure, to obtain commitments to build renewable electricity generation capacity. So you can see they sought photovoltaic capacity and wind generation capacity. And interestingly, the price for solar PV is coming out at 4 rubles per kilowatt hour, and for wind, less than 2 rubles per kilowatt hour, 1.7 per kilowatt hour of electricity. And the prices have fallen by 63% lower than the lowest bid in the previous auction. So the auction mechanism has achieved a reduction in the price of the generation from renewables. Okay, so just to come to our closing slide now, a comparison of the electricity and energy situation in the two countries. Now, my apologies for this being a rapid presentation, but the time is short. So both nations, as we know, are major exporters of the hydrocarbons. So the challenge is, can they transition to become exporters of renewable fuels and renewable electricity? So we're looking now at the question of, can, in Australia, for example, the export of hydrogen stored in various forms, liquid hydrogen, or stored in toluene, or stored in ammonia, or the export of electricity through high voltage DC cabling. So these projects are all actively being explored in Australia at present. And this is part of the context of growth in the renewable energy sector in Australia, which has been remarkable. But also in our study of the growth that is beginning in the solar PV sector and the wind energy sector in Russia, it's quite exciting that there has been rapid growth in both of those sectors. And we wanted to come to some opportunity for discussion amongst the conference participants at this point. And our argument essentially is to say that the auction mechanism is quite a popular mechanism, policy mechanism used by governments around the world to encourage the generation of renewable electricity at the least cost, but still to provide a certainty to companies who are looking to invest in the sector. So this is the challenge of policy, how to provide policy certainty, but still to provide an attractive incentive, but not an excessive incentive. And this is just some of the challenges that both nations will need to navigate as we move to a new energy future. So thank you for your attention. I'm going to stop sharing the slides at this point and to attempt to come back to you. Igor, how can I stop the slide sharing? Emma, are you with me?
I think you stopped it already. You've done it already.
Okay.
It happened.
Fantastic. Okay. Spasibo.